Hello, everyone. Megan here from Romance by the Book with the lovely Marielle.
Hello.
And this is our final week of June. So we are reading our final Halifax Hellions novel by Alexandra Vasti, novella, I should say. And this one is in which Winnie Halifax is utterly ruined.
That's right. She sure is.
Um, and it's
Well,
awesome.
the thing that's interesting with this is that we've already, like, if you read them in order, you start off, hearing like, oh yeah, their brother's out of town.
Mhm.
They're trying,
In
and
Wales. Yep.
Margot's trying to like, wrap some things up before he gets back. No worries, right? Like
Yep.
it's just everything's very normal.
Hmm.
But then you get to this book, and it's like, wait a minute. There's big.
And Henry knew about all this because he was
Yes,
involved in it. And so the fact that
yes.
he didn't say anything is interesting too. But yeah.
Uh-huh.
So we start with a prologue. It's 1811. Winnie is 20 years old and alone in the world. She has money and she wants to rent a cottage and a piece of farmland in Wales, but the Viscount Locksley's land steward doesn't want to rent to her because she's single.
He's
So,
basically like, "All the men in town are gonna be coming and knocking," and she's like, "Why is that my problem?"
yeah, that's not
But
my fault. Yeah. But alas, patriarchy. So she convinces him that in fact she is married, but she and her husband are estranged. He remains in London. He's found other companionship that she pretends to be like sad about, basically. And she's decided to move out on her own. And
and
she
he's like,
says,
"What's the name?" And so she's like, "Spencer."
and in her head,
Last
she's
name?
like, why would you use the last name your mom just used when she was thieving her way through the ton? And then she's like, last name, hurry, think. And she's like, the place you were born. And Halifax comes out. So she says she's Mrs. Spencer Halifax. Um, and then we
Okay.
flash forward 10 years later. Spencer Halifax, Earl of Warren, is visiting a jail cell to see a woman who is claiming to be his wife. 2 months ago, his solicitor Henry brought him a newspaper clipping about this successful company, Mrs. Halifax's Handmade Thread, with a woman who makes it claiming to be a Mrs. Spencer Halifax. And Henry was concerned. Spencer wasn't. He's like, I'm sure there's other Spencer Halifaxes. Like, I don't know this woman. Like, why are you worried about this? Right. Until a few weeks later, when Henry shows up with a copy of marriage bans that has his whole name, including his middle name, George, which to be fair was the king's name. So it's not exactly an
There are a lot
uncommon
of
name
Georges,
either.
yeah.
But he could only find this copy, not the original, because the original burned in the church where it supposedly happened. Um, and but with
And
this
so
paperwork,
he did, like, he sent for that information from Wales,
yeah,
and the guy that sent it to him said, "Yeah, I'll send you my copy, and I'll also make," because I guess he told him that the church had burnt down, so the original
right.
records were lost. So he was like, "So I'll also send the records over to, like, I don't know,
The
central record
local
keeping, whatever."
whatever, right. Um,
Um,
and so now he's like freaked out because if this is all there is, and there's no proof of the original or not, she could actually argue that she is legally married to him. Like if she wanted
so
to try to like extort him or whatever.
yeah, and Spencer originally was like, "I mean, it's not me. Like, I know it's not me. I was
Right.
18. I was with you when, like, there's no way."
Yeah.
And but the fact that that church burnt down and the original records from that church burnt down means that there's no way
They can't
to
disprove it.
verify.
Yeah.
Um, and Spencer, like, Spencer is not as worried until Henry is like, "Yeah, like, it could be a coincidence,
Right.
but say it's not.
Yeah. And she's going to try to
You
extort you. She could actually do
you
it
are an
at this
earl,
point.
and she could
Yeah.
make a claim."
And so that kind of lights a fire under him, and he decides to track her down in Wales. So he goes to her town and is informed that she was taken to jail the next town over. And he's like, what in the world? So he goes there and is horrified by the condition that she's in and pays a small fortune to get her out.
And the
He
guy from the
like,
jail is being, like, clearly a jerk. This guy's like, "She
yeah,
probably hasn't eaten," like,
yeah,
she's, like, covered in muck and
yeah,
smells because
and like manure, yeah, and he's like, this cannot do. So um
He's
she
kind of
is
like, what is going on here?
right. At first,
Until
she
he's
thinks she's
like,
hallucinating.
and it was so she's like, who are you? And he's like, I am
I'm your
Spencer
husband.
George. And the thing that's funny is that she made all that up, but she
Yeah,
put an address. She like
smudged it.
intentionally like blotted the
The
address,
number.
the number of the street, but it's like if you look at it from a certain angle, and if you so anyway, he explains what happened to her, and she
Yeah.
is like, what?
Well, and at first, when he first approaches the cell, she thinks she's hallucinating because she's like, he cannot be real. I literally made him up. Like, what in the world is happening right
Well,
now?
when he first approaches, she at first is like having a conversation with the man from the jail cell,
Yeah,
and it's like he's buddies with the guy who had her arrested. It's like
mhm.
one of her
Which is her
sheep
neighbor.
was like, she went to get one of her sheep out of off the guy's land, and the guy
Accused her
has
of stealing
accused
it.
her of like stealing from him. Anyway, it's a whole mess.
Yeah,
It's sour grapes because she like won some
right.
contests last year, and ever
Her
since
ram
he's been out
won
for
at
her.
the prize at the fair or whatever. Yeah,
Um, but but when she finally like sees him, she's like, wow, this guy looks real fancy. Like, why is he even here?
yeah,
And then when he says his name, she's like, what?
yeah,
Because she's like, you don't
yeah,
exist. Like, this
yeah.
is not.
So he gets them both up on his horse and he heads to her town and he goes back to the inn where he first talked to the lady who told him about her being in jail, where he has to introduce himself as her husband in order to get them a room together. And none of
Because
the stories
he's definitely not going to give her an opportunity to like run
escape.
away.
Yeah. And
Um,
none of the stories that she's told about him over the years were favorable to her husband. And so people are trying to start shit before they can even like get upstairs and he has no clue what's going on. So she finally was just like, "Oh, nope, gotta go." And she like drags him upstairs and he explains everything to her. She admits that she forged the bands to make her story more plausible, but she literally picked a name out of a hat. Like it was not ever meant to be him. And so, but when he tells her that, it might mean that they are legally married, she is horrified. And she's like, "What do we do?" And so he starts listing off these options, and of course, she doesn't wanna admit what she did because she could end up in jail, and Lord knows she doesn't wanna go back there if that's how it is. And she's like, "What about an annulment?" But she would have to testify at Westminster, and she could potentially be linked to her criminal mother, which she doesn't want either. But she still has 3 diamond necklaces that her mom stole 10 years ago before they got out of London, and she would like to return them to their owner. She knows who they
yeah,
belong to.
her mom was like a courtesan, I guess, and so she had these like liaisons with like high powered rich people,
Yeah,
and some of them like gave her money,
or gifts.
and but she also stole things.
Right.
And the reason she left her France all those years ago was because like people were onto
Starting
her,
to catch
and
on.
she
Yeah.
needed to like get out of there. So she had offered Whitney like, you can come with me, or I can give
Give
you
you some of this
money.
money.
And so she takes the money because she's like, I don't want to have that life.
Yeah.
And she goes off and
And
makes
so
her
she
sheep
knows who these
empire.
things belong to, and she wants to return them, and then she feels like she would truly be free of her mom's, like, misdeeds, and she wouldn't have to, like, be looking over her shoulder at all. And so
Right,
she
because she
agrees
has
to go.
basically stolen goods that she has no opportunity to return, but she doesn't want to
Sell them
sell
or
them or spend them, on her,
right,
because it doesn't belong to her. So you can see that she has like a really like high sense of like right and wrong.
right,
And
especially considering that her mother is who she is.
yeah, so the only
Um,
reason she agrees to go back to London is because she's like, well, maybe I can return these here stolen goods, and then I
yeah,
won't have like this stuff in my house.
and so when she comes, the maids bring a bath for her, and he waits outside, and when she comes out, he is, like, struck dumb by her beauty. Of course, he couldn't really see her before. She's, like, covered in muck and smelled like shit. So
Literal.
he's, like, struck dumb by her, and he thinks he's in trouble if he's gonna have to share a carriage with her for a week. That's, like, his first thought. So, a couple of hours after leaving, they come upon a field of this flower called lady's bedstraw, which she uses in some of her in her like most popular dye color for her thread.
Yeah, it's like
So
from the
she's like,
roots, it's like a
"Stop!" Like, she makes the carriage, like, jerk to a halt, and she goes running out into the field, and he's like, "What in the hell?" And so she's gotta figure out where they are so that she can come back to this place, like, on her way back. So she tries to, like, climb a tree and see if she can see anything she
she
recognizes.
just needs, like, landmarks so that
Right.
she can come back. She wants to ask whoever owns that field if she can, like, just take the
Take his flowers.
yeah, get
And
the root
so
of it or something, but she explains it in great detail,
yes.
and
Um,
Spencer is like, "Well, you can't."
she got up
She's
the
like,
tree, but she couldn't see anything. And so she came back down and she's like, "Oh, well." And he's like, "I mean,
"I
I'm
can
taller than
climb."
you. I can climb a tree." And so, but
She's like, "You can't, you're too heavy and it's gonna fall." I think he kind of gets a little offended, but he's like, "I
yeah,
can climb as high as you can, but I'm
yeah,
taller than you. So even if I don't go any further, I
right.
have
I can still
height
see
in my
more.
favor."
And so
So
as he's climbing, the branches are creaking and she's like starting to freak out because God, she's like, if this man gets hurt because of me, like I will freaking die. Like I've already done enough bad stuff to him, right? So he starts to fall and she goes over under the tree to
to
like try to catch
catch
him.
him.
And so then we flash forward 6 days later in the carriage. He's looking at the remnants of her black eye that he gave her with his elbow when he fell out of the tree.
On top of her.
He did at least see a landmark for her before he fell out, so she will be able to, like, find that place again. Um, and they've
But
gotten to
he's
know each
like, he
other.
fell on her and, like, rolled so that he didn't fully squash her, but he
Yeah,
did elbow her in
elbow
the
her in
face.
the eyeball. Yeah, and so I guess he said it's like it's healed faster than he thought. It's been a week, so it's just kind of like a celery green is what he compares it to, I think. And so they have gotten to know each other over this week in the carriage together. And though she clearly doesn't enjoy talking about her mom, like anytime he's even broached that subject, she kind of clams up and he doesn't want her to be uncomfortable. So he's like backed off every time. And when they get to his house, Spencer is shocked that his twin sisters and his solicitor Henry are absent.
Well, like, on the way, they had talked about what they were gonna tell people, and he's like, "I
Right.
mean, we can tell them you're my wife," and she's just
Yeah.
like, "Mm-mm." She's
Yeah.
okay with him, like, explaining to his sisters what happened.
Right.
She's like, "I don't want you taking blame for anything that I did."
Or having to
But
lie to your family about something that is not your fault. Yeah.
right, but she also doesn't want to publicize because she's like, "This is just gonna make more trouble than it's worth." So
Right.
when he gets home and his sisters aren't there, he's like, "Oh, no," but she's like,
Yay. Now they
"Excellent."
don't have to explain her presence to his sisters. So then she kisses him and then tells his butler that she's a widow who will be staying a while. And he's been kind enough to help her. And they're all
Oh,
like,
also
okay,
she starts like it's interesting because Spencer is like, "Look, the servants are still here. They're good to us. They're loyal, but still,
but
like
yeah,
it's either we tell them you're my wife or like some
you're a
like
fallen
fallen
woman.
woman." And she's like, "All right, fallen woman it is."
Great.
It kisses him in front of a full view of all the people who had came to see him like
Yeah.
return home, and then walks toward the butler to introduce herself with this like sexy sway to her hip, and her voice is different a bit, like, and he's
Yeah.
like, "What just
He's
happened?
like, who is this woman? I haven't
What
seen
just
her
happened?"
before. Yeah. And so, and in her head, you're seeing that she's like, she learned all this from her mom, like when she was young, and she hasn't had to use it for a while. So she's a little rusty. That's like what she's thinking about. So in the library, they go in there together, and she's like looking around, and he is reading the letters from his sisters and from Henry. And he doesn't know what to do. Um, she convinces him to let his sisters handle things on their own. They're clearly like, I mean, she's like, you're basically a week away from like it'll be done by then. Whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen. Like you can't do anything, you know?
Well, he says, like, "I can send them a letter, tell them to come back, but it's gonna
Right.
take 2 weeks for the letter to get to them."
Yeah.
It's just, like, there's no quick way to solve.
Yeah. And so while they're talking, they're getting kind of close and they have a moment, but they both kind of pull back pretty quick. And he tries to reassure her that they'll try to get through this quickly and that everything will go back to normal.
It is kind of interesting because, he very quickly starts to be like, he wants to take care of her, he wants to make sure she's fine, he's happy for her to, like, be in his space, but he's not sure that she's, he's like, she definitely wants to go back.
Right.
She's built a life for herself. She doesn't need this mess. Also, like, who does she even want to be a countess? Probably not.
Right. Right.
So he's got all these reasons in his head why this doesn't need, like, it's probably not going to be a thing.
Yeah.
And she is also like, oh, he's so handsome. His hair's so nice. It's, like, she is
Yeah. She's smitten too.
enjoying, but also, like, she very much feels like she does not belong here.
Yeah.
Um,
And so a week goes by and she's still trying to figure out how she's going to return these necklaces. But Spencer
she's
won't,
super frustrated because he keeps getting invitations places,
and he
and
won't accept
he,
any of them because they're trying to keep a lid on this whole situation, I guess. And
it doesn't seem like he goes to parties that much anyway.
no.
So she's just kind of like,
She's
"Ugh."
like, I'm never going to meet any of these people if we don't go out. So then he gets a letter from Henry saying that he and Margot eloped and wouldn't be returning right away. And he is shocked. He's like, as he thinks about it, he's like, I mean, I guess I'm not that shocked, but also now that I think about it, I should have maybe noticed that before. Like that was, like he's surprised, but then he's like, maybe I should have been noticing that closer before.
He
Um,
says if it was my dad would have known it, like, would have
right.
known. And it's not the first time that he's kind of, compared himself not favorably to his
Yeah.
father. But
Mhm.
that's it's interesting that she has the thought then that he's really hard on himself. Like,
Yeah.
he is not allowed to
So,
make a
well,
mistake.
and he does say he's like, I'll write to them, but yeah, it's going to be a few weeks, obviously, until they get back. So she tells him that she wants to look at rich people. And he's like, what? And she's like, I mean, she comes up with this story. She wants to see how they're wearing their embroidery, like in order to know more info for her thread
Like,
business
how
and
are they
what she's
using their
doing stuff.
threads? Hmm.
And so he agrees to take her shopping. And so she really hopes to run into the necklace owners. Like she brings the necklaces with her. She's hoping it's just going to be like happenstance that she's going to run into one of them.
And
Um,
she's thinking like she'll just slip it into a bag here or do something,
right.
it's fine.
And as soon as they're out, she starts to get worried because she realizes how much London seems to have grown in the last decade. And like, she's like, how in the world am I going to find anybody in this mass of people? Right. But as they're sitting at this little tea shop, she hears a shopkeeper next, like, stall over say the name of one of the men that she's looking for. And so she decides to cause a distraction to get the necklace, sorry, into the package that is going to be sent to this guy's house. And so a whole bunch of ridiculousness ensues with escaped parrots and a monkey stealing her purse, which gets opened up inside of the leather stall and the necklaces fall out, which of course makes them look stolen. And Spencer saves her from potential
Yeah.
jail again.
Yeah,
But he also
she's
introduces her to
thinking
everyone.
she did have a plan
Excuse me.
to somehow, like, distract the stall owners long enough, but this plan is, as you mentioned, harebrained, also
Ridiculous.
just does not work. And she ends up, like, in the stall,
Necklaces poured out of her purse.
necklaces all
Monkey running off.
around. It's like, clearly the guy is like, who are you?
Who
What are
are
you
you?
doing back
Yeah.
here?
These are clearly
Also,
stolen.
clearly you stole this.
So Spencer saves her and introduces her as his wife. And she's like, oh God, no. Like, this is the thing we were trying to avoid, right?
Yeah.
So she's horrified. On the way home, she breaks down and tells him everything about her mom and her plan to return the necklaces. And he says that he'll help her.
It
And
turns
she's
out
not,
that he had noticed from the beginning that she's not good at hiding things. So she came out of her house with, like, the
yeah,
bag, and he was like, okay, something weird. But he
yeah.
was hoping that she would tell him, and now he knows, and he's like, okay, well, we can work on this together,
Yeah.
which,
Well, and it's come up before when they were first leaving her farm and all the instructions she was giving to this kid who was taking care of it and stuff. She's not used to asking for help and she doesn't like doing it. And so asking him in this situation is really hard for her. But now that he knows, like he's in now, he's not going to let her like go this on her own. So, but when they walk in the house, the butler is overjoyed at the news of the new Lady Warren and has prepared the Countess's suite for her. Uh-oh. Because they're adjoining
like,
rooms with a
in the
connecting
time it
bathroom.
took them to get home. the news, the gossip had
The
already
news
reached
traveled
their
faster
house.
than them, and Spencer is even surprised by that.
Also, he has a tiny concern because the Countess's suites are in they're adjoining rooms, but it's like he said whoever the architect was must have been like a romantic
Lusty
or something,
architect,
a
I think he
lusty.
called him or something.
Yeah, because like all the walls are super thin. Also, like the bathing rooms and stuff
Yeah,
and change rooms are
it's shared.
shared.
Yeah,
And also, like, yeah, he's just like, she is gonna wake up and breathe in the morning, and I am gonna
I'm gonna
know.
hear it. Yeah, and he's
Uh,
imagining her, like, in the bed, and it's a problem.
Immediately, he's like, she's gonna be naked
It's
in
a
the
problem.
bed, and I'm so close. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a problem. So the next day they go over the necklaces and what she knows about who they belong to. And after a while, it's like too much proximity and he leaves. So he goes,
There was like a very funny moment where he's like, "Did you ever think about the post? Like, why didn't you
and
just
she's like, yes, but I didn't have their address. And he's like, I mean, you could have found it though.
confirm?" He's like, "Or throw them in the Thames? Like, why?
Right. Like,
Why?"
why are you doing this to yourself? Yeah, it's funny. And so but he decides to leave and he doesn't come back until after dinner, like hoping that she's gonna be asleep.
He
But
also
she's
like he's out. This poor man. He's the sweet dummy. But anyway, yeah, he's out. He's like painting the town red, kind of. But he's just like, and then he's like, I should write her a note and let her know I'm going to be late. And then he's like, wait, she's not really my wife.
but
I
he's
don't
like, I'm
need to
not
be.
married. I don't have
I
to
don't.
report myself.
But then he does anyway. It's like he can't. He's
It's
like,
so
she's going to be
cute.
alone at the dinner. It's so sad. So anyway,
So
yeah,
he gets home and she's not asleep. She is in the bath, which is his
a
like fantasy
nightmare,
come to
an
life.
absolute nightmare. He's like, it smells like lemon and
Yep.
I should leave. However, maybe she would drown. She might drown in there. I
I
should
should
stay.
stay. He is so turned on and he starts like getting himself off when she calls his name through the door. And so he does up his pants real quick as she like asks to come in the room and he agrees. So she asks him if he made any progress on their plans that day while he's been gone and he says that he got them invited to a dinner party. One of the men will be attending also and he has an idea about getting him the necklace back. Um Also, she cringes uh every time he mentions her being Lady Warren, like she like cringes like a little bit and he does not like that. Like it's hurting his feelings
He's
and it's very sad.
misunderstanding the cringe, but it is really, like, funny
It's
that
very
he's just
sad.
like,
And so the next night they go over their plan to watch they want to watch the man arrive so that they can make note of his overcoat. And she's going to go into the coat room at some point during dinner and like put the necklace in the pocket of the man's coat. Um, but they manage it, but it's hard. Like they keep having to delay leaving the entryway because of course the hostess is like, "Come on, let's go." And that, and they're like, "Oh,
in,
what
like, the
about?"
sitting room, and she's
Yeah.
like, "Oh." She feigns having a difficult time, like, taking her coat off, and she's like, "I mean, it worked kind of, but also made me look like I
Right, she
was,
can't
like,
go too long
needy."
'cause she doesn't want to make him look like an idiot for her like her because she's an idiot or whatever, like because she can't even unbutton her own coat. Like it's a thin line. So they do manage to do this through like a comedy of errors, but they get stuck in the cloakroom hiding from a couple of servants who are like getting it on in the dark room while everybody else is having dinner. And so she's basically like lying on top of him, like under this like couch thing where this other couple is having sex. And she's getting turned on. And so she kisses
He
him and they start like silently making out and like feeling each other up. Finally, the other couple finishes and leaves, and Spencer is like ready to take her home and like keep going, but they have to go back to the dinner first because otherwise it's going to be like super suspicious if they
Yeah.
leave and then this
She's like,
necklace.
if we leave without saying goodbye in the middle of the dinner
Yeah,
and, and this necklace, like, pops up,
shows up.
it's
Right.
gonna
It
be
will be
weird.
super sus. So on the way home, he doesn't touch her because he's like, I know if I touch her, I'm not gonna be able to stop. So he just like stays on his side of the carriage and it's steamy looks and all that. And so after they get home, they go straight to his room and they start making out. And he's undressing her and they're both like getting into it. And then she kind of reminds him, like, we can't actually like fully have sex in case we need to get that annulment.
Yeah.
and it's like cold water on his head. Like, he's just like, he wasn't thinking about that at
He's
all.
like,
He's
"What
kind of
annulment?"
sad that she was. And so that it kind of stops for a minute. He he hates the idea of her leaving. Like, he wants her to stay, but they can't talk about that right now, obviously. And so he has to kind of take a beat, but he also doesn't want to stop what they're doing, and neither does she. So they like make each other come, and then they like fall asleep together, which they basically continue to do for like a week, like throughout the next week. And Winnie is a mess. Like, when she's like, when I have to go back to Wales, like, I'm gonna be heartbroken. Like, this is a disaster, right?
It's like she didn't realize how lonely she was, and he in particular, like, it's not just that there is someone, he is such a,
And
like, good
yeah.
someone, um, and she hasn't, like, had a lot of experience with men,
Mhm.
and so when they
And
start
all she knew about them was mostly through her mom, which of course was not a good lens to like see life through, basically.
yeah,
Yeah. So they decide to go to the opera together to try to find the second man for the second necklace owner. And so they come up with a plan and they send a note. So once they get there, they send a note to the man anonymously, like through one of the bellhop guys or whatever, who to like meet up with him to get some like intel on one of his political rivals. That's what they think will like bring him
it's
out
like
to.
a way to get him out of there,
And so Spencer will go talk to the guy and occupy him so that she can leave the necklace in his suite while they're gone. So
which they do, but when she gets there, there's a grandma in
it
there.
almost goes off perfectly, but yes, grandma is there, and thankfully she's very old, and she manages to hide like in the drapes like of the back of the room. And Spencer comes to the rescue and takes the dowager to his suite to meet his new wife. That's what
The
he said.
dowager makes me laugh, but she's like, "I'm old, but I'm not, like, senile, and I do not remember your
You
going to
getting
your
married?
wedding." So, it's super cute. She's like, "Did you look like your parents?"
Yes.
And he is, like, "Haha, we'll take you away." Meanwhile, Winnie
Yeah.
is, like, booking it back
Right, she's got a
to
beat
their
somewhere, so she is, like, hauling ass. And so
when
she's like
she
she's trying not to, like, make it obvious. And it's very funny. And so that all goes off well, thankfully. And once they're alone in the suite, they're both, like, feeling amorous and decide to leave early. And so in the carriage, it's about to go down. But they
and for
have
a book for a little series of novellas that had that a lot of carriage time between them, this is the first time
yeah,
that we actually have, like,
actually get,
action on
like,
a
sex acts in the carriage. So, they have a bit of a wet hump basically until, she comes and then she goes down on him and it is all extremely hot. And so they spend the next couple weeks, indoors because it's winter and bad weather, and they don't really talk about finding the third necklace owner. They just like enjoy each other's company basically. They are like talking, they're reading, they're playing games. It's all very like homey. But they do accept an invitation to a ball where the third man is supposed to be there, but they haven't really talked about like a
what they're
plan of
gonna
what they're
do.
gonna do. And so they're playing is it piquet? Piquet?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they're playing
It's like
strip
a card game.
piquet, which is hilarious, in the library when someone knocks on the door, and it is Henry and Margot back from Scotland. Yay. I
So
love seeing
sweet, and
them.
Henry is like, "I
He's so
am so
bashful.
sorry," and that's just like,
It's
"What are
so
you even
cute.
talking about?"
Um, and so, but Winnie decides that they need to tell them everything. Like they were probably going to tell Henry everything anyway because he's the lawyer and has to deal with it all. But like she wants his sisters to know the truth, so she does. She tells them everything, and Henry is like, I mean, there are things we could have done before, but now that you've paraded her around town as Lady Warren for the last few weeks, like that ship has sailed basically.
Yeah.
So annulment is the only like way. And the only way they can get an annulment in this situation without her admitting to like, fraud or whatever is to say that, they haven't consummated. And they haven't technically consummated. So they can still say that in court. And then Margot is like, or you could just like stay
Get
married. Like
married.
she clearly sees that they're into each other.
Margot has solutions.
Yeah. And she's like, that
Yeah.
seems easier. You could just stay married. And of course, Winnie loves that idea way too much, but she doesn't want to take anything else from him or hurt
I
him.
will say it's interesting that, like, up in this, there's a moment in their, like, little sojourn of, like, nesting,
Mhm.
when he like stops himself from like actually like doing penetrative sex.
Yeah.
And she's just like, "Oh yeah, because he doesn't want to have to worry about the annulment." And I'm like, "Woman, you're the one. He
You're the one
didn't."
who said he couldn't. And so
So,
but she feels like all she's done is take from him basically and, like, make his life harder, and she doesn't wanna do that anymore. And he's helped her so much, and she's like, "No, I'm going back to Wales when this is over, like, you need to go ahead and do the paperwork. Like, we're gonna return the final necklace, and then I'm gonna leave." And she tells Henry to draw up the papers for the annulment, and then she, like, runs out of the library,
mhm.
with Spencer, like, basically calling her name after her. So he follows
Well,
her.
yeah, 'cause she's so sad about it, but I'm like, "But you."
Yeah.
Like, you're so sad.
Use your words, ma'am. So Spencer follows her into her room. Um, and of course, he's in love with her. He doesn't want her to go. He's like, an annulment will be big news. It could still harm your business. Like, we could just continue on like we have been. Like, it hasn't been that bad, has it? Kind of thing. And she says something like, none of this is real. And
And
it feels
ouch
like
for
a
him.
slap to his face, yeah, and but he pushes through because he loves her, and he's like, "Really? None of it? Because it felt awfully goddamn real to me," is basically what he says, and she's crying, and he's like, "Tell me what you want," and she says, "Nothing, I don't need anyone," and she's still on this, like, bullshit, like, "I don't need anybody, I do it by myself" thing, and he's like, "You're allowed to want things, like, there's nothing wrong with wanting things and wanting to be happy, like, whatever you want, I wanna give it to you," and she's like, "I know." Like, which is basically why she doesn't
That's
wanna
the
stay.
problem. She
Yeah.
doesn't want to. Yeah.
And so and she when she says, "I know you would give me anything," like, she sounds sad, and he can't really figure that out. And so they start kissing, and he's thinking, like, "Mine, mine, mine," this whole time. And she finally says she wants him inside, and he's like, "Please be sure, like, because this is it, right?" And she's like, "Yes, yes, yes." So they have sex, and of course, it's magical, and, like, almost right afterward, she's like he's thrilled, and she's like, "Well, we can still lie in court for the annulment." And he's like, "Oh god, like, I thought when
Yeah.
she said she wanted me, she meant she wanted to stay, and, like, that's not what she
Yeah.
meant at all."
No.
It was heartbreaking.
Yeah. And
And
it's sad because like, well, as a I think it's sad as a reader because you know that like neither one of them, like you're like, nobody wants this. What are you doing?
yeah. So Winnie is heartbroken too. She's entrapped him in yet another way now. That's how she feels. And like how long until he resents her for stealing all of his choices, basically. And so she couldn't bear that, which is why she decides to write a letter to mail, and she tells Spencer not to wait for her. She's going to meet him at the ball. So she sends her letter out to be posted, and she rides to the ball in the carriage, and she approaches the hostess, which is the Duchess of Vale, who's an older woman who's a friend of
He
his family.
he introduced them very early on in London because he was like, she was an
I think it
anarchist.
was
I
when
think
she was
you guys
covered in
will have
bird
fun.
poop from her shenanigans too, so it was, like, a very, like, weird meeting.
But he was like, you guys will get along great
Right, and he's
because
like, "You can trust her, like, she's a friend," or whatever, and so she asked the woman to return the necklace to its owner without explaining where it came from, and she agrees to do it. But as Winnie is about to leave, she runs into a man who looks like he's seen a ghost, and he calls her Eliza, and she says, "No, that was my mother." And he starts yelling about her mother and how she doesn't belong there, and of course, Spencer comes over and tells him to back off of his wife, and she's like, "No, I'm not the countess, not really. Like, we married under false pretenses. We've already started, annulment proceedings, and I've already written to my solicitor with my confession." And he's like, "Oh my God, why?" And she says, "I couldn't let you sacrifice any more for me." And he turns to look at the man and he tells the dude off. And he's like, "Winnie's not her mother. She's honest to her own detriment. And like, I was hers from the moment I saw her." And then he says, I wrote the quote. He says, "My Win, you are an adventure, a marvel, the love of my life, and everything I want, however you'll have me. But if you want an annulment, I won't stop you." And she is shocked, of course, because she didn't think any of that was happening, even though she should have
yeah,
realized that that was happening.
she should have known.
Um, and
But
she's
also,
like,
like, it's so interesting to see, like, I mean, I thought it was very well done to have like the mom and the reputation pop up at such a moment.
yes.
And yeah. Because
And
when
she's
he
like,
says
"No, of
no,
course I don't want an annulment. Like, I never did. I was trying to protect you." And so they kiss and they leave with a quickness. And in the carriage, she bursts into tears and she's like, "Did you mean everything that you said just now?" And he's like, "Yes." And of course, she's terrified, but she tells him she loves him too and she wants him forever. And she's like, "What about the letter to my lawyer?" And she's like, "What if we can't stop the annulment?" And he says, "Then I'll marry you again tomorrow." And it was the sweetest
it's
thing
so
in the
sweet.
world. And so
It's
she
interesting because like so earlier, and like when they first got to London, when she tells him all about her mother and everything, he believes her right away. And she's like, "Why would you believe me?" And and she's like, "I've done nothing but lie to you." But he's like, "No, but you tell the truth. You tell the truth even when it hurts you. You only lie when it's like you're trying to protect me from like
yeah,
having some kind of backlash." And you see it come back here where, she does not expect anyone to like stand up for her or
yeah,
be there for her. And he's like, why wouldn't I?
yeah, because he's amazing. So she says the word forever, and then she says that's the most beautiful word I've ever spoken, that she
Yeah.
thinks to herself, and also the most true. And they get out of the carriage to go back in the house, and that's the end of the book. And it
Yay.
is so cute. And you guys, Alexandra Vasti has written like an epilogue to this series. It's called A Halifax Holiday, and it's kind of like a epilogue
Like a
for all three
mini.
of the stories. And you can sign up for her newsletter and still get that, even though these books are now for purchase. The holiday like epilogue is still on her newsletter as of right now. So you can sign up and get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so good because each book, I think it's because each book is happening at the same time,
Right.
basically,
Hmm.
that when they end, they kind of just like, ta-da, we're done.
Right.
So it's nice to get, and that one's like a short story. It's not
Yeah.
even novella length. But it's nice
It's
to
very
get
good.
the wrap up.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, you guys, this has been so much fun. It's the first time we've done something like this with the three different novellas in a month, and yeah, I think it was really fun.
Yeah.
So we're very excited to talk to Alexandra Vasti next week, and we'll see everybody
And
then.
she's got a new full length novel coming out too. So you
Yes,
can keep
in
an eye out for
July.
that.
It's called Ne'er Do Well, and it looks really fun. So we're excited for that too.
Yeah.
And we'll be back with her next week.
All right. See you then.